Good morning, everyone. This is Jenny Singh again from the California Department of Education. We still have some people logging in, but we're going to go ahead and go over some of the initial slides, which are just really trying to take care of the rules for today. So as you can see, we have, if you are having audio issues, we are asking that you call in via the phone. If you're logged in via the computer, it may be choppy. So if you go through the phone, you should be fine. Again, you can download this presentation. We have instructions right there on the slide to do so, and we will be uploading this information to our website probably tomorrow. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I have several people in the room with me who are going to be doing the presentation, and we'll introduce them when we get to their portion of the presentation. Just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that even though we are posting the PowerPoint, we are not recording this webinar. It cannot be posted. So just FYI, we are not posting the recording of this webinar. We will be doing some polling throughout the webinar. We'll let you know when that happens. It will appear on your screen, and it's going to be open for about 45 seconds. And we ask that if you have questions, you put your questions in the Q&A. We are not going to be monitoring our chat box. So please, if you have any questions, please put that into the Q&A. So before we get started, just a couple more things. So the California Accountability Model and School Dashboard webpage has a new layout, and that's going to be up and running sometime today. So we wanted to make you aware of that. It has new tabs. It's up now? Yes. Oh, I've been told it got up this morning. So it's up now and available. It has new tabs, and we think it's going to be easier for people to access it. If you missed the Dashboard 101 webinar and you think that might be useful to you, that is now posted, and it's going to be under the District Resource tab. And we just want to remind everyone that we do have parent-friendly videos in both English and Spanish. And just so you know, the Spanish videos are actually done by Spanish actors. It's not a voiceover, so I think they're really well done, and it's a resource that you may want to use in the future. So we are going to start off, believe it or not, with a polling question. So we're going to get you going right away and on your feet. So here's the question. A student transfers from Moonlight Middle School to Neptune Middle School. The student was suspended and absent for numerous days at Moonlight. So that's the school that they transferred from. So now we're going to put up the polling question for you. Does Neptune inherit the student suspension and data? It's just a yes or no response. And you have about 45 seconds. Okay, so can we just display the results?
It will be closing in about 10 seconds, so everyone please put in your answers. All right, we are closing the polling. And let's see here.
Okay, so it looks like just about half of you did answer the question, so thank you very much. We appreciate that. And of course, the answer is no. Schools do not inherit someone else's data from another school. You only have the data from your school. So that's really important because we've had a lot of people actually come up before the state board and said that that's an issue. That's why their suspension data is so high. So we do have an example for you here. Jason was suspended at Moonlight 3 times and then transferred to your school. The 3 suspensions do not follow Jason to your school. They remain at Moonlight, but they do not follow Jason to the new school. He gets a fresh start. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the presentation. We're going to be covering suspension first, and that is going to be Kimberly who is going to be taking you through that. Kimberly?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kimberly Muntink, and I'm a consultant here with the Academic Accountability Unit at CDE, and we'll be walking you through the suspension rate indicator today. As a review, the suspension rate indicator applies to all grades K through 12 and all LEA schools and student groups with 30 or more students enrolled for at least 1 day, anytime during the current and prior year, will be receiving a performance level for this indicator on the dashboard. So for example, a student who enrolls in a school on March 7th and then transfers out on March 10th will be included in your school's cumulative enrollment file and would be counted as part of the suspension rate denominator. While in most cases, 30 or more students are needed to produce a color for this indicator, the minimum N size is special for 2 student groups, foster youth and homeless. Those student groups require only 15 students at the LEA level. Special note, charter schools are treated as schools when we're looking at this population count. Therefore, charters must have 30 students in the foster and homeless student groups to get a performance color. This year, we have a new business rule. So if you've been paying attention to the suspension indicator and you think you know what it's all about, I'd like you to pay particular attention to this slide because this is one of the new rules that's been implemented. Only students with an aggregate suspension of 1 full day will be counted in the suspension rate numerator. Beginning in 2018-19, all LEAs were required to report increments of suspensions for all students when they entered their data in CALPADS. So therefore, students who have an aggregate suspension of a complete full day, for example, that would be total suspension value would exceed 1.0 days, will be included in the calculation for the suspension rate. And therefore, all students who have an aggregate suspension of less than 1 full day will be excluded from the calculation of the suspension rate. This is different from last year and different from all of the prior years on the dashboard. Additionally, DataQuest and the dashboard will be, this data will be reflected differently on both of those areas due to this change. On DataQuest, students who have any suspensions, regardless of the length, will be included. So a student with a partial day suspension would be counted in the numerator of the suspension rate on DataQuest. However, on the dashboard, since students are only included if their aggregate suspension value exceeds 1 or more days, equals 1 or more days, a student who is suspended for a portion of 1 day, say a quarter of a day, and a portion of another day, another quarter, would not be counted in the numerator because their total suspensions of a half day is less than 1 full day. So in defining suspension this year, we want to be clear at what we mean by this. So multiple suspensions for 1 student. A student who is suspended multiple times is only counted as suspended once. They're a student who was suspended. And in-school and out-of-school suspensions both count in the suspension rate calculation. And so students who have the aggregate of 1 or more days will be counted in the numerator of the suspension rate calculation, regardless of whether it was in or out of school. So we have another polling question to reflect on the knowledge that we've just gained. So here is our scenario. In 2018-19, Samuel was enrolled at Jupiter, where he was suspended 3 times. He had 0.5 partial day suspension, a 0.3 partial day suspension, and then he left Jupiter. But he came back, re-enrolled at the same school as Jupiter, and was suspended for another partial day, this time for only 0.1 portion of the day. The polling question is, how many times would Samuel be counted as suspended at Jupiter on the dashboard? A, none, B, once, C, twice, or D, 3 times?
And you guys have about 45 seconds to answer.
The poll has ended, and you can see the results there. So it looks like the majority said A, none. A few people said once, and a handful of people said twice or 3 times. The correct answer is A, none. Because Samuel's aggregated suspension total is 0.9, he is not included in the numerator for any suspension count. So again, we'll revise again. Remind everyone that a student who's suspended multiple times at the same school is only counted if that aggregate suspension exceeds or is equal to 1 full day of 1.0 or more and counted. So if the aggregate suspensions total multiple full days at school, the student still only counted once in the numerator at that school. Here we have another polling question for you for multiple suspensions at different schools. So in 2018-19, James was enrolled at 3 different schools within Galaxy School District. He was suspended 5 full days at Mercy, 2 full days at Venus, and 2 full days at Mars. How many times would James be counted as being suspended in the Galaxy School District? A, 1 time, B, 3 times, or C, 9 times? Your poll is open now. So we can see from the results that 128 people indicated that it would be 1 time, 35 people said 3 times, and 28 people answered 9 times. The answer is A, once. A student who has multiple suspensions at the school level or at multiple schools within an LEA is still only counted as suspended only once at the LEA level. Because remember, again, we're counting not the number of suspensions within a school district, we're counting the number of students who were suspended. So that student could be suspended 9 times, but still only count as a student who was suspended once. As a reminder, when you're checking your suspension rate, you want to make sure that you know where your data is coming from. The data source for all of suspension data is coming from CALPADS, and it comes specifically from the certification of the end of year submission, which this year was extracted on September 6, 2019. We use the following CALPADS codes to determine which suspensions are counted. So it's CALPADS Discipline Action Category Codes 100 and 110. Which 100 responds to out-of-school suspensions and 110 responds to in-school suspensions. The calculation formula we use to achieve status for suspension level is based on the unduplicated number of students suspended in the 2018-19 school year. The rate is calculated by looking at the number of students who were suspended in 2018-19, and it's divided by the cumulative enrollment for that LEA or school or student group for 2018-19. And as a reminder, cumulative enrollment are the total number of students who are enrolled at least one day at any time during the school year. This number is usually much larger than your census day enrollment and differs. So please, and this is a number that's calculated here at the department. So that's a special number for you to look at and make sure that it's reflective of all the students who passed in and out of your school and or district throughout the school year. In order to calculate change, we look at a comparison between this year's suspension rate from 2018-19 and we subtract last year's suspension rate from 2017-18. Suspension rate data will vary by LEA and school type. Therefore, we have based our cut scores here in our accountability system on 3 different LEA types, elementary, high, and unified, and 3 different school types, elementary, middle, and high. Special note, K-12 schools have the unified school district 5x5 table applied to them to determine their performance levels. Since we have 6 different cut scores, this also results in 6 different 5x5 colored tables. The 5x5 tables are located on the California School Dashboard and the System of Support website, and you can access them through the link here, under the Overview tab in Appendix A of the Technical Guide. We also have a special automatic assignment of orange that applies to schools that do not submit suspension data in CALPADS in either the current or prior year. Those schools and LEAs are automatically assigned an orange performance level. If you do, schools that submit suspension data but do not certify the data cannot receive a performance level higher than orange, but it is possible that a red performance level will be assigned if the uncertified data places the school at that level. As far as common questions for the suspension rate indicator, one we get many times is, and I alluded to earlier, is why are the number of students reported in the suspension rate indicator different than the number of students who are enrolled in my site? This all is dependent upon the cumulative enrollment indicator that's used to determine the suspension rate denominator. This is all of the students who are enrolled at a site, be it school or LEA, at any time during the school year. We count each one of those students, and that, again, is an aggregate count we do here at the department. So this number will most definitely, except in very, very rare circumstances, be different than your census day enrollment.
Okay, with that, we are going to open it up for questions, and there is an announcement that we need to make regarding the suspension data. The suspension data is not going to be released tomorrow for the preview. That is because we've had some technical issues, and therefore we're going to release it on the 19th when we release the academic indicator and LB. So, sorry about the delay, but we will get it out there for preview before it goes public. We did have a request to go back over slide 12, so we're going to go ahead and do that now.
So slide 12 was referring to the different N size or population size for foster youth and homeless students at the LEA level. So this applies to all of the indicators on the California School Dashboard. So it's very important to note that the population size required to get a color for foster youth or homeless at the district level or LEA level is 15. And again, this applies to every indicator. And so for suspension, this would be a cumulative enrollment of 15 students who had a foster youth or homeless status for the year. So this, again, this might look different than your census day enrollment count for what you're looking at for these two student groups. And so please make sure you check when we have our private preview on the 19th for this information and check to see that the numerator agrees with the data that you have, as the denominator may be different from what we have, from what we're reflecting on the dashboard.
Okay, and we do have a question going back to slide 27. The question is, the red performance level will be assigned if the uncertified data places the school at that level. What do we mean by that?
So what we mean by that is that we know in CALPADS there's a certification process, and sometimes our data is uploaded, but we don't get to that place of actually being able to click certify prior to the deadline. And so I believe in this year we have a little over 30 LEAs where this applies to, and all of the schools within those LEAs that this rule would apply to. So in all those districts that did not click to certify but had data uploaded, we're going to look at the data that they reported. And it's in the instances where if they qualify for a red suspension level, they would be given that red level regardless of their certification or not. So this is really about if there's data in there showing that they have a level, they would receive red. Now, if the data in there was showing that they should receive blue, for instance, we will not be awarding them that because they did not certify. Therefore, that situation, we'd be giving them an orange. So that's what we mean by you can't get anything higher than an orange, but you may get red.
So we do have a question about extending the preview because we're releasing 3 indicators on the 19th. So I will just say that we will certainly take that into consideration and let you know at a future date if we're going to be extending that timeline. We will do our best to try to do that if possible, to give you as much time as you need to review the data. Someone is asking, can you see the data class versus dashboard slide again, please?
There we go. So reflecting on DataQuest again, that DataQuest will count all students who have any suspension. DataQuest will not be, so they'll be counting the number of students who were suspended, but they are not going to be looking at the aggregate amount of time that that student was suspended for. So, for instance, if you had 10 students at your school who had a suspension recorded as 0.1, and that was all they were suspended for the whole year, they'll show up in your numerator on DataQuest. However, they will not show up in your numerator on the dashboard. This is the main difference this year. So again, this information was collected this way through CALPADS. So while if you're doing your calculations in-house and trying to figure out what your rate might look like, the dashboard calculation should be available through through all the data that you submitted on CALPADS, because you recorded it that way and submitted it that way. So please refer to those files to be able to aid you in your calculations.
We do have a question here about CALPADS. We were hoping to have someone from the CALPADS office attend, but they were not able to make it today. The question is, when I download the CALPADS file to check my cumulative enrollment and suspension students, there is not a filter to find any foster students. What is the best way to isolate the students that will be count for this student group? I unfortunately cannot answer that question. I will take that to our counterparts in the CALPADS office and hopefully get back to you on that. If you could send that question to the aau@cde.ca.gov, we would appreciate it. But just so you know that this year when we're looking at foster students, a foster is only going to be counted as foster if they were at your school and they were a foster student at your school or LEA at any point in time during the school year. So if you receive a student who is a foster at another school and their status in foster changed before they transferred to your school, then we would not count that student as foster at the new school. And I think that's all the questions we have. So now we're going to be turning over the presentation to Katrina, and she's going to go over chronic absenteeism indicator. And recall that this indicator is for K-8 only. So for those of you that are logged on as high school, and you're only concerned about high school, feel free to log off now.
Thank you, Kim, for providing an overview of the suspension indicator. My name is Katrina. I'm taking over to talk to you guys about the chronic absenteeism indicator, as Jenny had mentioned. So with that, we will jump right in. As a reminder, like Jenny said, chronic absenteeism is only applying to grades K through 8. So any students in grade 9 or who are attending high schools and above grade 9 are not going to be included in this indicator. For those that are included, those in grades K through 8, LEA schools and student groups in grades K through 8 with 30 or more students who meet the eligible enrollment requirements in both the current and prior year will receive a performance level for this indicator. Now we have this section here that's bolded that says students who meet the eligible enrollment requirements. We're going to review that in a couple of slides, so just keep in mind that for this indicator, we are talking about those who meet the eligible enrollment requirements. Similar to the suspension indicator, the minimum end size for foster youth and homeless students at the LEA level is only 15. So they can get a color if they have at least 15. These student groups are considered separately, so each one has to have 15 in both years in order to get a color. So, to make sure everybody's paying attention, we're going to start our polling question number 4. The question is, why do none of my high schools have data or colors reported for the chronic absenteeism indicator? Our options are A, chronic absence is a K-8 indicator and data are not reported at the high school level on the dashboard. B, chronic absence data are not collected in CALPADS at the high school level. Or C, this is a mistake. High schools should have status change and performance colors reported on the dashboard. The poll is open. All right, thank you for those of you who answered this question. I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but on my end, I'm showing that a vast majority of us answered this question correctly. To say that, the answer is A. Chronic absenteeism indicator is a K-8 indicator, where the data will be reported on the dashboard for elementary and middle grades only. Keep in mind that the chronic absence data is available for high schools, but on DataQuest, not on the dashboard. The dashboard is only reporting those in grades K through 8. So if you would like this information for the high schools, you'll have to go to DataQuest. Okay, so all of what we've covered so far is really big picture, and now we're going to jump into some of the finer details and some of those definitions that we talked about at the beginning.
Yes, so before we move forward, I just want to let everybody know, because I do know there are some people, high school folks, who might want to log off, so we should have probably said this right after suspension. So we will be releasing the chronic absenteeism data tomorrow. We will be sending an email out, and it will come to you probably by noon, so please do not call us before 12 o'clock. We'll send an email out to all dashboard coordinators, secure accountability coordinators, and also to your CALPADS administrators. When the email goes out, it will give you where the site, where the preview is located, and the password that you will need to access the preview site. So expect to see an email in your box sometime before noon tomorrow.
Okay. So if you are part of a high school and you want to jump off, then we will see you next week. But to continue with chronic absenteeism, first we're going to define it. Chronic absenteeism, according to Ed Code, is a student who is chronically absent if they miss 10% or more of instructional days. This doesn't include weekends, holidays, or days that the school is otherwise closed. But it does mean that we are including any type of absence that includes excused, unexcused, and out-of-school suspension. In terms of those eligible enrollment rules that we talked about earlier, we're defining them now. So we talked about having K through 8 students only, that's our indicator. They're going to be included in the calculation of chronic absenteeism only if they are enrolled at least 31 instructional days and they have attended at least one of those days. We do not include, or we're not keeping those students who have been considered exempt in the district attendance submission for one of the following reasons. Either they've been in a private school, or they have home hospital instruction, or they're attending community college full-time. All other students that meet those eligible enrollment criteria are going to be included in our denominator, and then those who have the 10% absence would be included in our numerator. So we do have an example to share with you guys just to kind of give us an overview of what this actually might look like in the real world. During October 2019, this would count for actually next year's dashboard, but say it's 18, Starlight Elementary School closed for 5 days due to a nearby wildfire and power outages. How does this impact their chronic absenteeism rate? So if the school was closed for those 5 days would be excluded from the count of expected attendance days. It's not an instructional day because there's no classes happening, so the school would not be held accountable for those days. However, once the school reopens, students are expected to attend and receive instruction during these days. All open days before and after the wildfire will be included in the expected attendance days count. So, instructional days, only the days that are not weekends, are not holidays, and there are instructions happening. Oops, my sheet's too early. So the chronic absenteeism data is coming from the attendance data, which is collected in CALPADS. After that, we do our own kind of aggregation of that data to go into the dashboard. But this data is collected in CALPADS. It is certified data that happens during the end of year submission. This year it was closed September 6th, but traditionally it is closing at the end of August. Those dates are all posted on the CALPADS website. This is the same certification window that suspension is happening. So usually if you have not certified your data in one, you have not certified it in the other. In order to get our status, we are calculating the chronic absenteeism rate by including the number of students who are absent 10 or more % of instructional days and meet the eligible enrollment requirements. Remember, at least 31 instructional days enrolled and they've attended at least one day. And we're dividing that by the number of students who meet the eligible enrollment requirements. So only those who are in the denominator can be included in the numerator. To calculate change, we take the 2018-19 or the current dashboard year's chronic absenteeism rate, and we subtract that, we subtract the 17-18 chronic absenteeism rate. So pretty straightforward, very similar to suspension and the other indicators that we have for the dashboard. After that, we have our 5x5. And here, this is kind of our basic 5x5 that we have. They are all over our guides. They are all over the website. It shows what our current cut scores are for the chronic absenteeism indicator. Keep in mind that these cut scores have changed a little bit for the DAS schools. We'll get to that in a second. And that the 3x5 does apply for the chronic absenteeism rate indicator. This was covered at last week's webinar for the overview. So if you do have questions, you can go back to that, or you can head up the guide for more information about this. But the safety net 3x5 does occur for this indicator. Similar to suspension, chronic absenteeism does have the automatic assignment of orange. So schools and or districts and or student groups that meet the qualifications to get a color that do not certify their data in current or the prior year are automatically assigned an orange performance level. So what I like to say for the auto orange is that basically if you did not certify it, you can never get better than orange. So if you've submitted data but you have not certified it and it put you in the red category, you will still get red on the dashboard. But if you did not certify your data, and the data that you submitted put you in green, let's say, you will still get that automatic orange. Cannot do better than orange if you do not certify. So next I'm going to cover some common questions that happen around chronic absenteeism. The first question being, this indicator includes students in kindergarten. Does this mean that it includes students that are also in transitional kindergarten or a TK program? And the answer is yes. Transitional kindergartners and kindergartners are both coded the same way in CALPADS, so TK students are included in the chronic absenteeism rate because there's no way for us to distinguish which part they're in. I'm getting a head nod over here.
So we could distinguish if it is whether they're participating in TK program. But when we get the data file, there's no distinction in our data file, so they are included.
Got it. On your guys' end, it looks different than ours. When we get it, they look the same, so they are included. And then we get another question about the minimum amount of time that a student has to be in school to be considered not absent. To be counted as in attendance, the student only has to be there when attendance is taken. Therefore, a day attendance is defined as any day a student attended for all or part of the school day. Alternatively, if a student is absent when the attendance is taken, the student is counted as absent. For some of the schools, hourly attendance is taken. That looks a little bit different for those schools, so if you do have questions, contact your CALPADS coordinator or otherwise student information systems if you have questions about hourly attendance. But for the vast majority of our schools, we're looking at usually one period of attendance, and that will determine whether the student is present or absent. After that, we're going to get into some CALPADS data tips. So,
let's, go back and answer some questions that we have on chronic absenteeism.
sure.
So we have a lot of questions about slide 30, so if you could bring up slide 30, that would be helpful. So, there is, a question, about, let's see, please, clarify the not flagged as exempt in the district attendance submission for one of the following reasons. That's on slide 30.
Yeah. It's there.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so we are only including students in our indicator that have met those eligibility criteria that we talked about, having 31 days, attending at least one day. But we are excluding some of those students who we don't consider to be accountable to attendance data. Those that are enrolled in private schools, those who are receiving home instruction or home hospital, and those that are attending community college full-time. There's no reason why we would be collecting this data for this indicator at those schools because they're not really attending those schools. So we are not holding them accountable.
And then if we can go to slide 30, someone wants us to cover the second part of that slide, so the minimum end size for LEAs.
Okay, so in general, we say that a student group, a school, a district needs at least 30 in each year in order to receive a color. And while that is true for most of our student groups and schools and districts, there is a special rule that we have just for the LEA level at foster and homeless students, where they only need to have 15 in each year in order to receive a color. It is just for these two groups. It is just for the LEA level, and each one is considered separately. So if you had 15 in your homeless and 5 in your foster, you're only getting the color for those in your homeless category and not those in your foster.
And again, here we treat charter schools as schools. So if you're a charter school, your end size for every subgroup needs to be 30 in order to receive a color. And there is some question about the home hospital exclusion. How does it work? It's unclear. Does the dashboard know to reduce enrollment days by the number of home hospital days? And the answer to that question is CALPADS has instructed you to exclude those students from the enrollment, from the chronic absenteeism when you submit your data file. So if you have a student who is in a home hospital program for half the year, for that half of the year, you would not report any attendance data for that student when you submit your data file to us. If they come off of home hospital for the second half of the year, then that's when you would start to report the attendance for that student. And I hope that clarifies any questions we have about home hospital.
There are additional questions about the 3x5 and the 5x5 color grid for chronic absence. So if we could review that.
Sure. So once again, this was covered last week, but we'll cover it very quickly here since it does occur for this indicator. The 3x5 is for small schools, so those who have less than 150 students in their denominator will have a 3x5 grid. So we eliminate the increase significantly and the decline significantly columns from this 5x5 in order to make it a 3x5, where those schools can still qualify for every color. They will just not have such extremes because with smaller end sizes, we know that there's a little bit room for movement in either direction.
And it's important to know that the 3x5 is applied at the student group level as well. So if you have less than 150 students in any particular student group, we will apply the 3x5.
Correct. There is a flag on the downloadable data if you're interested, which will indicate whether or not the 3x5 methodology has been applied.
Someone asked if you could review or discuss how attendance in independent study schools compare to classroom-based attendance where a student is present and attendance is taken.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
If you could review how attendance in an independent school study school compares to classroom-based attendance where a student is present when attendance is taken.
So independent study is very different. It's done on an hourly basis, much like you do for ADA. Unfortunately, we don't have our CALPADS person here to answer these questions, so we'll have to get back in, to everyone in the details on that.
We're just taking a look now to see if there's any more questions that we can answer. We have a question that says, school starts at 8 a.m. Attendance is taken by 8:15, so if the student arrives from a doctor's appointment at 9 a.m. and attendance has already been taken, is he counted absent or can the attendance be changed? Ultimately, I don't think that's up to us. We get the data. Once it has already been submitted to your SIS, so I believe that is up to the school.
So that's a local policy and how you take your attendance. So if you have a policy to go back and mark a student who comes in late because of a doctor's appointment as attending, then it would get reported to us. Can we review slides 33 and 37 again? 33.
33.
No, I did.
No, 33 should be the status calculation formula. Our slides, we have a little bit more because we have answers to the polling questions.
Oh, okay, got it. That could be confusing. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you, Betty.
The status is calculated by taking the chronic absenteeism rate and dividing that, excuse me, the rate is calculated by the number of students who were absent 10% or more of instructional days, which is the definition that we have in Ed Code, to meet the eligible enrollment requirements. I added that part because basically it means to me that those who are included in the numerator must also be included in the denominator. And we divide those number of students who are chronically absent for more than 10% of instructional days by the total number of students who meet the eligible enrollment requirements. So we talked about earlier, those who have attended, have been enrolled at least 31 instructional days and who have attended at least one day.
The other slide was slide 37, the common question on transitional kindergarten.
Oh, okay. So to review, the kindergarten and the TK students are both included in the chronic absenteeism denominator. So they will be accountable for the attendance of those students. If they miss 10% or more of the instructional days in which they are enrolled, then they will be considered chronically absent. It looks like we've covered most of the questions here. So I think we're going to move on to CALPADS data tips.
Okay. So this is, I know that the submission of the data has already occurred, but we thought that we would take this opportunity to actually go over some tips when you do submit your CALPADS data. So the suspension and chronic absenteeism indicator are calculated, of course, using the data that you submit to CALPADS from your local student information system. And this also includes the demographic data that we use for the student groups. We take that from CALPADS as well. So it's really important that LEAs meet the CALPADS certification timelines and that you review your data before certifying. We got several phone calls after the certification timeline, after September 6th, indicating that that districts had made some errors in the data that they submitted. And really, there are some resources that you can use to make sure that your data is accurate before the window closes. Because once the amendment window closes, there are no opportunities to correct the data for the dashboard. You can go in and correct CALPADS ODS, but we will not use that data for the calculation of all the indicators for the dashboard. So here's for your discipline data. So there's a report 7.3. It says it provides you with information that is going to be really helpful. So you can see the number of out-of-school suspensions that you have, the number of expulsions that you have, and the number of in-school suspensions that you have. So you really want to take a look at this to make sure that it's reflecting what you think is appropriate. So you want to, you want to really answer the questions. What are your total expulsions? What are your total in and out of school suspensions? And if you see, especially for a particular student group, if you see, oh, the suspension rate for my students with disabilities is at 90%, and you know that's not accurate, then this would be a really good opportunity to go in and check your data before you certify that. And then you can compare these totals to your cumulative enrollment report, which is 1.21. So for your chronic absenteeism data, there is a report that CALPADS generates for this, and it's report 14.1. And it will let you know which schools are those schools with 100% of the students absent greater than 5% of the time. Are there schools with 0% of students absent between 10 and 20%? Any school with a zero count, you might want to review that data to make sure that it was reported, because usually it's pretty unlikely that there's no students who missed any days. And then it does allow you, this one report does allow you to filter for hourly attendance. So that's the indicator that we were talking about earlier, that for hourly it's done a little bit differently, so you can filter by hourly and see if it looks reasonable. And again, you should filter by subgroups to determine what the rates are. So if you see a subgroup that is like, wow, that's really high or that's really low, then that would prompt you to go back and look at the data that you submitted to CALPADS. So some additional items to note is that the foster year status and changes for the 2019 dashboard. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to bring it up to you. We received a lot of feedback from the field, and we were able to adjust our programming for the 2019 dashboard. So if a student has a foster youth status at any LEA or school at any point during the academic year, the student group was included in the foster student group for 2018. So that led to some difficulties. Schools, if a foster youth changed their status before the student came to their LEA, they would not know about the previous foster status. So they were unable to identify those students to provide additional services to them. So what we're doing for the 2019 dashboard is a student will be included in the foster youth student group only if they had a foster youth status at your LEA or school. And of course, we're going to look at any point there in the academic year where they were in attendance at your LEA or school. And if they had foster at any point or time, we will include them in the foster student group.
So there's a question here as to whether or not this only applies to suspension and chronic as a single year data, or if this rule also applies to the graduation rate cohort data.
That's a really good question. This rule applies for suspension and for chronic, but does not apply to the graduation rate or the CCI. Recall that for the four-year cohort, they look at a student status at any point in time in the 4 years that they were in high school. So if they were a foster at any point in time in the 4 years, they're going to be counted in that student group. That is true with anyone who is EL, students with disabilities, or socioeconomically disadvantaged. So this rule does also apply to the academic indicator as well. So we have 3 indicators where this rule does apply. So another common question that we get on charter schools is the data for charter schools included in the dashboard reported for the school's authorizer. And that answer is no, because under LCFS, charter schools are treated as LEAs, therefore their data is not included in their authorizer's dashboard. I know this can be confusing because sometimes we treat charters as LEAs, and sometimes we treat them as schools under the dashboard. So in this particular instance, no charter school data is included in the authorizer's dashboard. Another common CALPADS question is, and we got this quite a few times after the amendment window closed. It said, I updated my data in CALPADS. Why are my updates not reflected in my school dashboard report? So it is true that you may update your data during the amendment window, but if you don't do it by the end of that extraction, by the time we extract the data, which was September 6th this year, we will not be including that data. So if you update it after the certification, the amendment window closes, they will not be included. Also, if you by chance certified your data and then updated it without decertifying and recertifying, it won't be counted because we're pulling certified data. So if you certified your data, you can update it before the end of the amendment window, but you must decertify first and then recertify your data. Okay, so here are the dates for the previews and webinars scheduled for that are coming up. You'll see that we have the grad rate indicator and the CCI, which will be on November 12th. And then we will go over the rules for the academic and the LP on November 18th. So tomorrow when we send out a letter, we will send out a letter indicating to all of our secure accountability coordinators, to the dashboard coordinators, and to CALPAD administrators. It will provide you the link to the preview site. That preview site will only include chronic absenteeism this time. It is possible that the chronic absenteeism data will not be released for preview in DataQuest tomorrow. We are working on that, but it's a possibility that that may not happen tomorrow with the release of the preview for the dashboard. You will also get a link to a site where you can download the data file and download the draft guide. So for anyone who wants to read the draft guide between now and the public release and provide us with any kind of comments on how we can make it better for you, we will go ahead and make those changes before the public release. But please do not call us about getting an email until after 12 o'clock tomorrow, because you should, even if we send it out at 10 o'clock, it takes time for all of the listservs to get to everyone that got them, because we have quite a few people on those listservs. Okay, we'll go through. So the public release of the dashboard is going to be in the week of December 9th through the 13th. We haven't selected a date yet, but we will do the dashboard public release and the DataQuest public release of all the data in DataQuest that we include in the dashboard. And then we will also make publicly then the differentiated assistance file. And that will include all LEAs, whether they get general support or if they're eligible for assistance under LCFS. So to access news related to the dashboard and the system of support and the local control funding formula, you may have noticed that we released a dashboard newsletter, and that dashboard newsletter is posted at the web address that we have here. I would suggest going to that to get some additional information, and it does provide email addresses for all the offices and where you may have questions. So if you have questions on LCFS, there'll be a link to where you can send that email. So the local indicators, as you probably already know, the deadline for that was November 1st. 2019. We did send out, the department did send out an email to everyone for those districts and schools that were affected by the wildfires and affected by the not having electricity from PG&E. And we were asking if they were affected by those wildfires and were unable to upload their local indicators. So we're waiting to hear back from people on that. The deadline for submitting that information, I'm not sure when it was. I believe it's this week. And if you are affected by it, we will work with you to try to figure out when we could, what timeline would be best for you. For state indicators, we have, if you have any questions on the state indicators, you can contact us at the address listed there at the Academic Accountability Unit. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. If you don't have a secure accountability coordinator, you really need to sign up for that. And there is a link that we're providing in the slide deck. It's also on our website. So if you want to sign up for a secure accountability coordinator, you will get access to the preview. We allow districts to have and charter schools to have up to 2 secure accountability coordinators. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do so. And then here's all the resources that we have on our website that's been redesigned. So we do have a lot of information there. We have information, we have parent guides and flyers for educators. We have our webinars posted there. We will have key points that you might want to share with your community members. That will be posted before the public release. And I just want to point out our additional reports. Again, we built all the additional reports basically on the request of everyone in the field. So we have one that is for our College and Career Indicator, or the CCI. That has a new look, and it has a new look based on the feedback that we received from all of you. So take a look at that. You might want to look at the participation rate reports. That's going to be really important as we move forward. We'll be covering that topic at our on the webinar that covers the academic indicator. And then we have a student group report and a district performance by county. So you can go into a county and look at all the districts and their performance just in every county. And then, of course, we do have information about DAS schools and what the criteria are to be a DAS school. So you can take a look at that if you'd like. So at this time, we'll stop and take any other questions that may have come in.
So there's a question regarding single school LEAs and how the foster youth and homeless 15 rule applies to them.
So on the dashboard, we report single school districts. We report both the school and the district because they do have different CDS codes. The school in that case would not have the 30 because they are considered, they would not have 30 foster youth, so they would not get a color. The LEA would only be accountable to those 15 in order to get a color, and since they do have 15, I think in this example, they would get a color at the LEA level.
So one of the questions that we often get is for the new rule for the foster youth status, and whether or not this already applies, if this also applies to homeless as well. So my understanding is that this rule has already been in place for homeless students. It's just that this is a new rule for foster youth. And we've got a couple of comments about the draft technical guide. This guide will be made available to you tomorrow as part of the embargoed, access to the embargoed files for chronic absenteeism. And so, yes, only for those who have access to our secret private preview website will be able to get access to the guide and be able to provide any edits or comments that you wish.
So we do have a question about our parent flyers and whether they're going to be provided in multiple language. And yes, we do translate those flyers into the top 6 languages throughout the state. So we do have those available, and hopefully it'll be a very good resource at the school level and at the LEA level for parents.
And on our new web page layout, there's a tab for translations, and you can go to that. And many of our flyers for parents are already up there with all of the translations.
Someone asked if the local indicators would be included in the dashboard preview tomorrow.
That is a really good question. I will have to check with our LCFS counterparts to find out if they're going to be releasing that. So I would say stay tuned. And if they are released tomorrow, I will make sure that we have a conversation and find out exactly when they will be released so people will have access to that information.
So somebody asked for a clarification on the home hospital and whether or not they would be excluded or included in the chronic absenteeism indicator. The answer is not so complicated, but the answer is that for the time that they are considered home hospital, they will not be included. So if they are home hospital your entire year, then they will not be included in your denominator. But for the time that they are out of home hospital and in your school, the attendance data should be collected for that student, and therefore they would be included in your denominator because they are not home hospital during that time.
Okay, we're pausing here to look at questions, and I think we've answered almost all the questions that were submitted. There is one question about the CALPADS suspension rate under the report 7.3. Does the CALPADS count only full day suspensions or partials as well? I believe it counts any suspension, whether it's partial or full day, so it counts both. But we will verify that with our CALPADS person and maybe put that in frequently asked questions. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. I would like to go back and remind you about when we're going to be doing our webinars for the remaining indicators. Again, the graduation rate and the CCI indicator, the webinar will be on November 12th with a preview of November 12th through the 15th. You'll notice that that is the only day that we're actually doing the webinar on the same day as the release, and that is because of the holiday on the 11th. And then we have our academic and our LP and our suspension indicator is going to be released on November 19th, but we'll do the webinar for the academic and the LP on November 18th. Thank you for taking time to join us, and please feel free to send us an email if you have any additional questions about any of the state indicators. Thank you and have a great day.